every spoonful is an orgasm. Hello, my fellow Italian food fanatics. Today, we're going to go into the kitchen and we're going to make a delicious onion soup. Now, it takes a while to do this, but most of the time, the soup is unattended. So you got to put it into the oven for about 3 hours, the onions, and you just stir them on the hour. So there's really not much involved as far as labor is concerned. It's in the another half an hour after that where you have to be attentive. But let me tell you, the results are worth it. You probably would have seen the picture already, but if you can't, let me just tell you, I've tasted it already. It is phenomenal. So let's get in the kitchen and learn how to make it. You're going to love it. It'll be something that you can serve to your friends. It was actually a request from one of my fans that says, come on, can you help me make this? We haven't had it, they've had one good one maybe in their life, but they love onion soup. So here we go. Okay, my Italian food fanatics, today we're going to make a request that I got on email, believe it or not, for onion soup. So we're going to make a classic onion soup. And of course, to do that, we're going to need some onions. Use the regular. Don't buy the sweet onions. Use the regular yellow onions. You don't need, or you can use white onions. I'd prefer not to use the red onions, but or the Spanish onions, but you can if you want. We're also going to use some chicken stock. If you don't know how to make chicken stock, I have a video on that. We'll use some cooking spray. We'll use salt, some thyme, a couple of bay leaves, some butter, and some sherry, some dry sherry, as well as some water, and you'll see what I mean by that. It's a little bit of extra water that we're going to use to deglaze the pot. We may even substitute more chicken stock for the water, but you don't need to, all right? You could buy the chicken stock, but as you know, it's not that difficult to make. It's easy, and you can do it. Just follow the video on how to make the chicken stock. It takes a few hours, but most of that time you're not even around. It's so easy, it's a crime not to make it yourself. So we'll come back in a second, and we'll start in with cutting up the onions. All right, let's get started. One of the best things that you can do is to get a sheet pan liner. This is a very large one. I buy them by the case, but you can buy them 25 at a time off of the web. And that is to keep this area clean, so I can just wrap this up. So I'll give you an example. We're going to top and tail the onions, cut through the center like this, and of course we're going to peel back the top layer so that we don't have the skin and everything. You can keep this for stock if you're going to make the chicken stock, but what essentially is going to happen is we're going to peel the onions just like this. And then when we're done, all you do is just wrap up this paper, and you can take up all of this onion skin with you, and it can be discarded or thrown into a pot with the stock. And that way, you are not constantly cleaning the board. So it's a very efficient way of taking care of what you need to take care of and then cleaning up quickly afterwards. And I also suggest that, it's very easy to peel back this one layer and eliminate one layer that way rather than peel off the skin. But you lose a tremendous amount of onion if you do that. So, for example, if I were to just go like this, sure, that's the easy way of doing it, right? But I've lost this entire amount of the onion, which is a waste. However, if there's blemishes and things like that in the onion, then obviously you're going to want to discard them. You don't want to keep the one layer and have a blemish or something that's not palatable just because you want to save a little bit of onion. The onions are not that expensive. However, I learned from chefs that were babies or kids post World War II, and so to them, any sort of waste was unacceptable. They grew up in very austere conditions, and so they were trained never to waste anything. In fact, I've even seen one of these chefs go into a trash can and retrieve an egg yolk that somebody threw in the trash can because they didn't need it. They were just using the white. That's how frugal these German and Austrian chefs were, that were the children of the war, essentially. Because after the war and even during the war, they had nothing. Their supplies were limited, and they had to make do with what they had. So they wasted zero. And we should learn from that, because there are people that in this world that have nothing, and we have so much. We should be thankful for what we have and not waste, and follow that lead, okay? Because over the course of your life, believe it or not, and this is the way chefs think, especially people that run kitchens, over the course of your life, saving an ounce here or an ounce there could be the difference of hundreds of pounds of onions, hundreds of gallons of stock, hundreds of gallons of sauce, and the like. So when you think in terms of the amount over the course of your career or over the course of your life, and now multiply that by all of these people in America, you can see the tremendous amount of waste. All right? So now, here we are. I have taken care to peel the onions and cut them on the paper. Now let me remove these. I'm doing this for you, and so consequently, I don't have the room that I normally would have. So there we go. Take this paper, and you fold it up, just like this. And now we have a clean cutting board, save for a couple of little pieces here. I'll come back when we cut the onions up. Okay, we're back. And now we're going to cut these onions pole to pole, and you don't have to cut them very thinly because they're going to be cooking for a long time. So about 1/4 of an inch thickness here. You don't have to go fast. You know, I can go bang, 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 and cut them up like that. Now I'm not going to bore you with all of this, but just to suffice to say, go slowly and make accurate cuts like this, and you're going to be just fine. It's not as fast as you're probably going to go, but I can go a lot faster. But you don't want to cut yourself. You don't want to have any mistakes in the kitchen. Professionals, they do this all the time, and they do cut themselves on occasion. It's inevitable. If you work in this business, you are going to cut yourself. You relegate yourself to that. And occasionally, typically, if it's a cut, it's going to be pretty bad.
So we'll just fast forward through all of this, and that way you won't have to be bored with it.
Okay, so now that I'm down to the last half, let me show you something. You can just go straight down like this and move back your fingers, and you'll do fine that way, all right? Even though that's a little bit bigger than 1/4 of an inch, it's going to work. It'll be just fine. So now that we're done with our onions, we're going to preheat our oven to about 400 degrees Fahrenheit. And we're going to let the onions sit out like this for about 20 minutes. And there's a reason for that I'm going to explain in this next segment.
The reason why we want to let the onions sit out for about 20 minutes after we cut them up is because when an onion is cut, there are some sulfur compounds that combine to form a new compound called propanethiol S oxide. It's the stuff that makes your eyes tear when you cut it. And the more pulverized the onion is, the more of this propanethiol S oxide is formed. Okay? Now, this compound, after about 10 minutes time, turns into another compound which is water soluble, and it's called 3-mercapto-2-methapentan 1-ol, or MMP. It's a conversion that speeds up when the onions are heated, and even though this compound is derived from a vegetable, MMP tastes remarkably meaty. But the reason why I want the onions to sit out for 20 minutes or more is because we've only sliced them a little bit. We haven't fully pulverized them. Now this transformation, if you really pulverize the onions well, takes place after about 10 minutes. So that's the reason why I add an additional 10 minutes, because it hasn't been the onions have not been pulverized, and so consequently I want that extra time for the MMP compound to develop.
All right, now it's time to put our onions in the pot. We're going to take a little bit of this spray, and we're going to spray the inside of the pan, because the onions are going to caramelize against the sides. We don't want them to stick. All right, so we just spray a little bit of that in there, and then we can put our onions in. And you just put them in there like this and break them up a little bit. We'll be back when I'm done with that. And now that our onions are in the pot, what we're going to do is take a little bit of that salt that I showed you earlier and put it over there and mix it in. And we're also going to add a little bit of butter to the mix as well. I like to use organic, unsalted, or what's known as sweet butter. We'll just cut off a little bit here. All of the amounts are going to be on my website, gsargenti.com, as well as all the different tools and things that I use. And we'll just put them in here like this, and we'll wait while our oven heats up, and the 20 minutes have passed. Now you might be asking yourself, why in the world would they cut the onions pole to pole this way? The reason for that is because the onions, we want them to stay together. They are going to go through what I would consider a lot of abuse or a lot of cooking. And so consequently, if we cut them this way, all right, we're making already very, very small strands, even 1/4 of an inch, and the onions will eventually disintegrate and fall apart in the final soup, especially after we have to caramelize them. So by cutting them from pole to pole this way, it ensures that they'll retain their integrity throughout the entire cooking process, and also be there at the end when you want to eat the soup. You want to actually see onions, and that's why we cut them pole to pole. All right, we're back. You know that we put butter, we put some salt with the onions, and we've now waited the requisite 20 minutes, and the oven is preheated to 400 degrees. I'm going to put the lid on, and it's going to go in the oven on the medium to low rack so that there's space in the oven for the onions to cook, and it's going to go in for 1 hour. Okay, after about 1 hour, we will now take the onions out of the oven, and you can see that they're caramelizing. And what we're going to do is just mix them around a little bit. And then they're going to go back into the oven for another hour. In fact, we're going to do it twice. So they're going to go in for 1 hour, another hour, and then another hour after that. And what we're going to do this time, though, because there's a lot of liquid you can see in there, we're going to leave the lid slightly ajar, just like this, so that that liquid can evaporate and the onions can caramelize a little bit more. But the reason why we mixed it around is so that the onions wouldn't burn. So back into the oven. We'll see you in about an hour. Okay. We're now coming to our second hour. And you'll notice that the onions are slightly more caramelized and the liquid at the bottom has evaporated probably by about 60% or so. So we're going to put them in again with the lid ajar for another hour and let them caramelize a little bit more. We'll see you in about an hour. All right, we are through with the third hour of cooking. And now look what's happened. That has really browned nicely in there. And what we'll do now is scrape this up. All of that is flavor, believe it or not. And we are going to go onto the stove now and complete this. Okay, we're now back on the stove. I've turned the heat up to about a medium high. It's about a 7 on a scale of 1 to 10. All right. And we're going to move these onions around a little bit until the moisture evaporates. And then what we'll do is we'll begin adding stock little by little, about 2 ounces at a time, and deglazing and really browning these onions very, very well. This would be, you would be lucky to get the onions browned like this at a restaurant. You would be lucky. But now we're going to take it a step further. We're going to go to the next level and get some serious flavor into this pot. And I'll be back when we're going to deglaze. Okay, as you can see, the onions are slowly starting to sizzle on the bottom there like that. Now, believe it or not, there's about a 1% protein content in onions. And when the amino acids from the protein break down at a little over, I think, 300 degrees, and they mix with the sugars, what happens is what they call the Maillard reaction. It's a term that I think is a little bit overused these days. As it becomes more and more ubiquitous, it tends to be overused and lose its true meaning, just like anything else. However, what happens is the sugars and the protein, the amino acids, combine to form new flavor compounds along with the browning, and this is what's called the Maillard reaction. And the only way that we can get amino acids is if there's protein in stuff. So now that we know that onions contain about 1% protein, we know why the Maillard reaction works in this case, along with the natural sugars that are in the onions to begin with. Now, that's the reason why you don't want to buy Vidalia or Maui or sweet onions, because it's too much sugar in them, and it ends up tasting too sweet. But if we buy regular onions, there's enough sugar in there, along with the protein, to create the quote-unquote Maillard reaction and develop very, very deep flavor. Okay? In fact, that's exactly what happens. Because of the Maillard reaction, they form new flavor compounds, that thousands and thousands of flavor compounds that we find very appealing as human beings. So we still haven't begun to deglaze yet, but I wanted to explain that to you and to show you what I'm doing here with regard to the browning parts on the side of the pot. Now, I have with me my trusty kitchen towel, because this just was removed out of the oven, this pot. So you want to make sure that you don't forget that. And if you're going to leave the pot for any time at all, whether it's in a regular kitchen or in a commercial kitchen, you want to make sure that you leave these hand towels on the sides of the pot so that anybody coming in already knows that the pot is hot. All right, and they won't burn themselves. It's a courtesy that you extend to the people that you work with, and that can also work with your family. Imagine your child coming in and touching the sides of the pot and burning themselves. You wouldn't want that, and you wouldn't want that. You wouldn't want to do that to another family member or to a coworker at all. So always remember that you have to be cognizant of the fact that everybody must know that the pot is hot and that they need to watch out. So we'll continue cooking. You can see how this stuff is browning on the bottom, and the liquid is slowly beginning to evaporate, or basically, that's fat that you're seeing there from the butter, but that's beginning to caramelize. Look how much darker the onions already are. All right, we're just building more and more flavor. Now, a lot of people can do this deglazing with water. It's very possible to do that, but I'm choosing to do everything here today with chicken stock, because chicken stock is traditionally the type of liquid that is used with onion soup, and using a beef stock, in my opinion, is kind of cheating the whole process. If you have to stoop to using a beef stock or a beef bouillon or anything like that, I don't know. You really don't deserve to eat this soup if that's the case. But look at how much flavor development we already have. Look how much darker the onions are. Now let's add a little bit of chicken stock to it. Okay, only about 2 ounces. And we'll continue to cook and deglaze the pot until this evaporates, and it's pretty quick. All right, so we'll come back when we form like a layer of fond here on the bottom, and so you'll see what I mean. So you'll notice now, if you look carefully, that sizzling is beginning to create more brown bits, and we're developing more flavor. It's now time to add a little bit more stock and to continue deglazing and creating more and more flavor and flavor compounds. All right, you can see at the edge over there, what was clean a minute ago is now caramelized, or the Maillard reaction has taken place, and we need to scrape all of that up and into the onions. Can you believe that? All of those onions have reduced down to such a small amount. All right, we'll come back when we're ready to deglaze just a little bit more. Now you'll notice here, again in that corner, right there, see how that's browning up? Now we need to deglaze another time. Put the stock actually on there. You could use water if you want. That's not a crime. In fact, that's a way to showcase how truly skillful you are. If you can create this, and it's very possible to do it with just water. But I want to build all kinds of flavor, and I suggest that you do the same by using stock as opposed to water. All right? If you make the stock at home and from scratch rather than buying it, there's really no fear in that, because there's no salt. You're not concentrating a sodium flavor into the dish at all. What you are doing is, though, developing a tremendous amount of flavor. Look how beautiful that is. I mean, boys, that is just awesome. Wow. All right. So this is how it's done. And it is time consuming. That's why when you go to a restaurant and order a French onion soup or an onion soup of any sort, it's pretty much depressing, because it does take skill, it takes technique, it takes time, it takes a little bit of knowledge and know-how in order to create this sort of a soup, and it's time consuming. All right, let's put it that way. So typically, you can tell a restaurant how good a restaurant is by how the soup is, because the soup is relegated to the lowest person on the totem pole, and usually that person doesn't know what they're doing. So if a restaurant has an excellent soup, you'll know one of two things: that even the lowest person on the totem pole really knows what they're doing, or the chef cares about his cuisine and ensures that he oversees even the making of the soup. All right? So that's one way to tell if a restaurant is any good, is by ordering the soup. And one of the ways to tell if a restaurant is clean in the kitchen is by visiting the bathroom. If the bathroom is clean, then the kitchen is probably clean, because it's far more difficult to keep a kitchen clean than it is a bathroom clean. And if they care about the bathroom, well, then they care about the kitchen. So here we are. Now look at that. That's a deep, dark, rich brown color. I'm going to actually deglaze one more time, and then we'll get to adding the rest of the stock and the aromatics. And of course, we can't forget the sherry. The sherry actually comes next. So we'll be back. All right, we're back. Look how rich and deep that color of brown is. I mean, it just doesn't get, it could get a little bit darker, I'll admit that, but not much darker than that. I mean, that is fully developed flavor, and it is absolutely gorgeous. That's why we cut the onions the way we did. You see how much abuse these onions take, and how much they've reduced in size and gotten rid of all of their moisture, and then concentrated their flavors. And along with the browning that we're doing here and the deglazing, it's really come into its own. So now it's time to add our sherry. And I add a little bit more sherry, excuse me, than the average cook, because I enjoy the flavor. And so we are going to cook this down until the sherry is reduced to almost zero. And they call it, in cooking, it's called reduced to sec, reduced to dry. So we'll come back when that's reduced down and dry. Okay, now that our sherry has reduced down to nothing, essentially, what we'll do is we're going to add in our stock and our aromatics. All right, it's important to also note that when you're doing cooking like this, to turn the pot around occasionally, because this side of the pot you really can't see. I know you probably have noticed on some cooking shows where there's muck that's left here that the person cooking cannot see. And so consequently, when you turn the pot around, you will see the areas where you missed. All right, so you won't get one pocket or area that is burned as opposed to one area that's clean, or not incorporate everything into the dish. So here we go. That's about as brown as we're going to want to get. It doesn't get browner than that, let me tell you. That is full flavor. And now we will add our stock. Sorry about the camera movement there. It's almost inevitable because the camera is so close to me. And we're going to add a little bit more than what we have there. We're going to add an additional few ladles of stock. And this is all chicken stock. No beef stock, no bouillon, nothing. This is all stock that I made by hand. In fact, I'm going to put the rest of it in here too. And we add our aromatics, which is a bunch of thyme that's been tied together, and a couple of bay leaves. All right? We're going to bring that up to temperature. I'm going to bring this up to a boil, and then turn it down, simmer it for about a half an hour, 45 minutes, and then remove the bay leaves and the thyme, and our soup should be ready. Well, then, only after all that's taken care of will we adjust the seasoning with salt and pepper. All right? And in the meantime, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the stock to kind of clean the edges of the pot, as it were, and get all of that flavor into the soup. All right, so you just lift up like that with the spoon, and then when you have wood against metal, it's okay. You wouldn't want to do this with like a metal spoon. It's the same thing when I make the Ligurian pesto. You'll notice that my mortar and pestle is wood and marble. So the mortar is marble and the pestle is wood. So that two opposing types of substances, when they rub up against one another, do not create problems. For example, if we were to take a metal spoon and scrape, you would get, although it's probably going to be minute and you'd never know, you're going to get stainless steel in your soup. And so we'd rather not have that. We're going to try to avoid all of that. So you can see how when I just do this, as the water or as the stock touches the areas of the pot that have the little bits on them, that they slowly will come off. And all of that flavor gets brought into the soup itself. So we'll be back when it's at temperature. Okay, now our soup has come to a boil. It's not a rolling boil. We don't want a rolling boil, but it is boiling. And now we're going to turn it down, and we're going to simmer it for about a half an hour, 45 minutes, and we'll be back. All right, here we are. The soup has been simmering away, and it's now ready. It's been about 45 minutes. So now all we need to do is remove the bay leaf and also the thyme. Let me fish that out. The nice thing about tying the thyme is that you can just fish it out that way. And we're going to throw back some of these onions because we want all of those onions in there. And let's see, where are the bay leaves? There's one. Throw back the onions. And where is that other bay leaf? That's all we got to do is find that other bay leaf, and we can then adjust the seasoning and enjoy this onion soup. I'll find the bay leaf and we'll come back. All right, so it's time to taste and adjust the seasoning. Oh boy, does that have a good flavor to it. But it certainly needs salt and pepper. So we're going to add that about right now. Let's take a little bit of salt and add it into there. And also some fresh ground pepper. Give it a stir, and we'll see again how it tastes. Oh, that's good. Now all we need to do, and this is another secret, is add a little bit of acidity. And we do that with a little bit of sherry vinegar, but we're not going to do it into the pot right now. We'll do it for each bowl that we have. So now all we have to do is make the croutons, and we'll sit down and eat. Now, traditionally, to serve onion soup, we have our classic crocks. This one is a little bit different. It's round. It doesn't have a handle, but it has a nice design on the side, and it's quite elegant, in my opinion. This is more of a country style, and but it does have a handle, and it makes it very convenient. But you don't have to buy all those. You can just use a regular bowl, like I have here, and in fact, that's what I'm going to eat today's onion soup out of. Now, we're going to make the croutons. To make croutons, I've gone ahead and I purchased a small round loaf. And I did this on purpose because, as you can see, if we're going to cut a crouton, it's going to fit within the confines of the crock. With this one, you don't have to use that. I'm going to show you another way, but with baguette bread in just a moment. But let's turn our attention to these crocks. What I've gone ahead and done is pulled out some of these ring molds that we can use to create croutons by pressing down on them like this. But we're going to cut this in half, and we're going to create two of them. And I'm going to show you a way to create the crouton without having to use these molds as well. Now, when you're making croutons, they don't have to be perfectly symmetrical or anything like that. In fact, this one isn't. But I'm going to cut it so that it is even. And believe it or not, I actually prefer to have the crust of the bread, excuse me, as opposed to just the center. So I kind of like this part, especially when it gets into the soup and it becomes chewy and nice along with the cheese. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. I'm going to now cut this down the center to essentially create two croutons. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. In fact, look, this is cut here. But let's take our first one, and this is going to go into the smaller crock. So I'm going to use a larger mold, and we can press this down like this and create literally the perfect size crouton for our crock. It's going to go right in there like that. And no one's going to know that this is part of it. In fact, it doesn't matter because it's going to float and be covered with cheese. You don't have to get it perfect. Now, let's talk about this one here. If you don't have a ring mold, you can basically turn it over like this, line up the edges, and then just cut around it. Again, it doesn't matter. In fact, we'll use this part right here and put it into the crock like this. You'll see it's going to be perfect. I'm going to toast these now in the oven, and we'll come back when they're done. While our bread is toasting, we can now grate the cheese or slice the cheese, as you'll see when I do the cheese for the baguette bread. For these two, for the crocks, I'm going to actually shred the cheese. This is real Gruyere from Switzerland, and that's the only cheese that I suggest that you use. I don't even like using Emmentaler, or you definitely don't want to use our Swiss cheese for this. You've gone through the trouble of making a beautiful soup, and now you don't want to. You want to use the best ingredients all the way up to the end. Otherwise, it's just not worth going through all the trouble. So I cut off the rinds, and these are going to, because they come from a larger wheels, they're going to be inconsistent in size. You can see it's not symmetrically cut. So that's what you'll have to deal with. But this is the real Gruyere. It's got an excellent flavor to it, and it's the only cheese, in my opinion, that you should use for this particular dish. I love it. It's phenomenal. So we'll just grate it on a regular box grater, and I'll come back. Now, when you do this, you also want to be careful of your fingers because if you've ever worked with a box grater, you'll know that if it gets up there, if your fingers get too close, you're going to cut yourself. So what I do is I have what I call the chef's reserve. By the time we get down here, this part is ours to eat. So that's just a little FYI. It's a beautiful justification. Be careful of your knuckles too, especially. Knuckles on a box grater are definitely not fun. We'll be back. Okay, now the broiler is on. I'm going to put a piece of parchment paper down here before we commence with the cheese and the croutons, just to make sure that we can keep everything in one small area. And now we'll fill the crock and bring it over. Okay, you can see how I filled the crock, but not all the way to the top. Obviously, we want room for the crouton. So we're going to place the crouton inside of the crock. And see, we can't get it in here. So what we're going to do is break it up a little bit. And again, that doesn't matter because no one's going to see this. And we'll put another piece right here like this. And then we'll put Gruyere on top. Now I've toasted both sides of the bread. A lot of people like to toast just the one side, but I find that toasting both sides is better. So it's going to float in there, and then now we're going to put it in under the broiler to melt this cheese, and we'll be back when that's done. All right, I've placed a towel down because I'm going to put the crock here, and it's going to be very, very hot. But we can take it out from underneath the broiler, and you can see how that cheese has beautifully melted. Now, there's another way to do it by putting the crouton a little bit higher or filling it with more soup and having the cheese go over it like this. And we'll do that with the other crock, and we're also going to add in some sherry vinegar into the next one, which is my preferred way of eating it. But you can fill the crock up a lot higher, but this is just enough for a soup, as maybe half of a meal. You can have this with salad for lunch, and it is totally filling and wonderful. And you can see there's no way anybody can tell by the time they dig in with the spoon into the soup. The crouton and everything will have amalgamated, and it's going to be just fine. But it should be served super molten hot this way. So there's one version. Now you can see in this iteration, I have actually filled up the crock very high, all right? And I'm going to do exactly what we said before by putting this crouton in and filling in the little spots here with the other little crouton. You can see they're literally floating on top. So now, if we were to take the cheese and put it over that, what will end up happening is that it's going to melt, and it's going to melt all over the sides and create that quintessential onion soup look that we've all come to love. Now, the advantage of having a handle on the crock, like we had with the other one, is that you don't have to be very careful. This is already, for me, it's not that hot, but for the average person, it's going to be very, very hot. And so I suggest that you use a towel and that you put it in the oven to melt very, very carefully. That's one of the advantages of having a handle. We'll come back when this is now molten, and we're going to brown it a little bit more. All right, now it has come out of the oven, and it is literally perfect. This, our onion soup, I have let the cheese brown a little bit. Remember, that color equals flavor. And so there you go. That is the onion soup in a crock. And you can now see, as I cut into this, how beautiful it is. And you can also see, there's a reason why we put a plate underneath there, that cheese and the onions are molten and they melt together. And there's no way you can tell that we used a half a crouton or 2 pieces or anything like that. It just melts all in together. And you can also tell that when we added the chicken stock and brought the soup back to a simmer, that the onions kind of reconstituted themselves. You can see that there's so many onions in there. And that is the other quintessential secret, is that onion soup has a lot of onions. And you can make them out. Okay, they're not destroyed. Now there's one other thing that I like to do, and I'm going to do it with the one that we're going to use with the baguette bread, and that is to add a little bit of sherry vinegar into the soup. I like to do it afterwards, believe it or not, although you can do it before as well. It's just sharper that way, and that acidity is a counterbalance to the sweetness and the unctuousness of the soup itself. It's a counterbalance that you're going to want in there. Try it with it, try it without it, and I almost guarantee you that that you're going to like it better with the vinegar than without. So now on to our next iteration in a regular bowl with baguette bread, in the event that you don't want to go out and buy Crocs and things like that. You don't have to. All right. For the croutons, I have gone out and I've purchased an organic baguette. Now, all right, now that our croutons have been toasted on both sides, I really did toast it on both sides. I'm not lying to you. We're going to place our Gruyere cheese on top and let it melt. Again, toasting or adding color and caramelization is basically, it's adding flavor. You never want to skip that. So here we go. Back when these are melted and we can serve it. All right, here's our onion soup. I've put a little bit in a bowl. And we are going to do an addition of sherry vinegar, which, believe it or not, is the secret to having an excellent onion soup. Now you notice that I just put a tiny little bit in there. You want an acidity to balance up the sweetness of the onions. And also we have sherry cooked into it, the dry sherry. So this adds a counterbalance to everything that's going to be awesome. Now all we have to do is put our croutons on there and we're ready to eat. Could there be anything more beautiful than those croutons? I highly doubt it. We'll get those on here now. I mean, how sweet it is. I'm just going to put them in there like this. And that's going to be perfect. There you go. Onion soup with croutons and Gruyere cheese. It doesn't get any better than that. Now let's go taste. All right, my Italian food fanatics, here we are. The onion soup is ready, finally. We've added a little bit of sherry vinegar to give it that other je ne sais quoi. I don't know if you can see it, but my mouth is watering just thinking about tasting this stuff. First, let me mix it up a little bit. Oh, look at that. Oh, that is so good. I don't like the typical crock
with the melted cheese over it, where you have to put the spoon in and it gets everywhere. I would rather have the cheese on a crouton like this. My goodness. Boy, that's good. And be able to bite into it and enjoy the soup on its own without all this gooey mess going on. But boy, my friends, it doesn't get better than this. The time that you spend doing this is so well worth it. Make your own chicken stock. Make the recipe just the way that I show you. And live in ecstasy, in culinary ecstasy. Every spoonful is an orgasm. It's unbelievable. This is, with some rare exceptions, it's better than sex. It's better than sex, I'm telling you right now. With some exceptions, of course. So, if you like what you see, yeah, thumbs up, subscribe, hit the bell button, comment below. Tell me what you think. You think I'm wrong? You think this isn't better than sex? I'm telling you, with exceptions, it is. Oh, this is good. There's a reason why this is an iconic dish. And you can find it in almost every culture. It's simple, but not simplistic. It's sophisticated, but it's easy to do. It takes a little bit of technique, a few little secrets, which I've shared with you. You gotta go. You gotta go do this. You gotta make this. You'll thank me. Your husband or wife will thank me. They'll thank you for making it. And then see how the sex is. A way to a man's heart is through his stomach. It doesn't get more delicious than that. Honest to God. I made enough for a second bowl, and a third bowl, and a fourth bowl, and a fifth bowl. And guess what? That's what I'm going to be doing for the next week. This is going to be my meal. So, I'm done. Stop watching me eat. Please, get into the kitchen yourself. Go and make this. Takes a little bit of time, a little bit of technique, a little bit of expertise, but I gave it all to you. I left nothing out. Now go do it. You'll be happy you did. Thank you. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for the thumbs up. Thanks for all the comments. I appreciate it. And I hope to meet you one of these days. Thank you. Have a great day.